Dr. Dre, Timbaland, Swizz Beatz, Metro Boomin. I'm sure you recognize one, if not all, of these producers. How about Frank Dukes? Not many people, even those self-proclaimed hip-hop heads, know of this talented Canadian producer. Yet Frank Dukes has single-handedly revolutionized the way many chart-topping songs are produced today. In this video, I'll explain who Frank Dukes is, how he has revolutionized production in the music industry, and how this has led to him working with huge artists like Taylor Swift, Kanye West, and Post Malone, to name a few. Born and raised in Toronto, Canada, Frank Dukes' first introduction to music was through piano lessons at age 5. He'd eventually fall in love with music as an early teenager, listening and collecting records from the 60s and 70s. He loved the sounds that he would hear on these vintage records. Frank was first into punk rock, listening to a lot of Nirvana, but eventually discovered hip-hop, taking a particular interest towards the production aspects associated with the genre. This led to him buying an MPC at age 17 to begin producing his own beats. To begin, Frank would dissect his favorite beats, like those produced by Jay Dilla and DJ Premier. He would listen and try to understand what they did to get a certain sound or drum pattern. By learning from the greats, Frank developed as a producer, getting better and better each day. Finally, after 8 years of this, he scored his first major production credit on Queen's rapper and G-Unit affiliated Lloyd Banks for his track Sooner or Later.
Never thought in the beginning I would see us fall in the end, pay a man to paint pictures on the wall of my friends.
For the beat, he got commissioned $5,000, which would further drive him as a producer, as he remembers thinking to himself, I might be able to make a career out of this. This lucky break of working with Lloyd Banks led to Frank connecting with another G-Unit affiliate, also from New York but much bigger, 50 Cent.
And then I'm like, yo, I need to get him out here from Toronto so I can sit with him and just vibe with him, because creatively, his ear and the things that he's actually making is exactly what I want to do right now. And I really don't want y'all to actually get so familiar with him before I get the really big hits out of him, you know what I'm saying?
He produced a song for 50 titled Talking in Codes, which sampled Menahan Street Band's The Traitor. Unfortunately for 50 and Frank, the Menahan Street Band didn't end up clearing the sample, thus Talking in Codes never got an official release. There was no bad blood between Frank and the Menahan Street Band though, as he ended up befriending the band's leadman and guitarist, Thomas Brennick. The friendship led to Brennick inviting Frank to sit in on their band's recording sessions in Brooklyn. The recording session Frank sat in on forever changed the way he approached production, and effectively up-leveled his production game through being introduced to the Menahan Street Band's process. During the recording session, Frank observed the live instruments that the Menahan Street Band recorded, and how the recordings used nothing digitally, meaning no computers, but instead recording everything straight to tape. This process is much more difficult at first, as a producer must rely on their ears during recording rather than a screen. However, it provides a different sound, one producers describe as more warm and rich with a specific vintage tone. After this experience, Frank took on a whole new strategy with producing. Instead of creating full-fledged beats, he started forming loose musical ideas that had this older sound because of his newly discovered technique, which is formally known as analog recording. To begin, Frank leaned on good friends and fellow Toronto natives River Tiber, who's a record producer himself, and the band Bad Bad Not Good to help in recording these loosely formed musical concepts. Upon recording a few of these, Frank had another idea. Having been involved as a producer in the music industry for over 10 years at this point, he had experienced firsthand the frustrating process involved with sample clearances, much like the problem he and 50 Cent experienced. Frank recalls, when I got my first few placements and got back my publishing splits, I saw what I had to pay to clear the sample and thought someone is getting the better deal here. Now before I dive into Frank's solution for this burden many producers experience, I want to provide an overview on sampling and the technicalities behind it. Google defines sampling as the technique of digitally encoding music or sound and reusing it as a part of a composition or recording. Basically taking a sound from something and integrating it into your song, manipulating the original sound or not. The act of sampling is what makes hip-hop so unique as a genre. Today, most of hip-hop songs contain one, if not more, samples of original work in them. Whether it's the actual beat itself, like on Kendrick's Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, or if it's just paying homage to a melody or lyrics like Tyler does on his Igor track, I Think. Sampling is deeply rooted in hip-hop, but is also seen in other genres too. The act of sampling is seen as a creative performance in itself, in that you have to first find and discover the song, then pick out a sound from the song and flip it into a different track entirely. However, not everyone shares the same sentiment towards it, as the act of sampling has gotten criticism and labeled as stealing. In 2012, Frank Ocean, who although is not a hip-hop but instead R&B artist, effectively sampled a song on his mixtape Nostalgia Ultra called American Wedding.
I took a walk with the palm trees as the daylight fell.
The sample is from the Eagles' classic Hotel California and takes the whole melody of the song. This didn't sit well with Eagles band member Don Henley, whose spokesman said Frank Ocean did not merely sample a portion of the Eagles' Hotel California. He took the whole master track plus the song's existing melody and replaced the lyrics with his own. This is not creative, it's illegal. Of course, this is an extreme use of sampling, where it can always be seen as a cover of the original song. Aside from criticism, there are legal repercussions that can come from sampling if the proper steps aren't taken. In order to release a song that contains a sample of another song, or audio, you need two different licenses. The first one is a license to use the master recording, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is the original recording which copies of the song are made from to put on Spotify or Apple Music. This master recording license is typically owned by the record label, or if the artist is lucky, they'll own their own master recordings, which is a whole nother issue that's very current and prevalent in the music industry. The other license needed is the underlying composition, which is the musical content and lyrics for the song, so the actual material in the song. This license is controlled by the publishing company of the artist or the songwriter, but typically songwriters are signed to a publisher, which at times can also serve as the artist's label. Then, you have to reach out to this publisher and or label and find the owner of the master recording, which in itself is a cumbersome process because often labels are bought out by bigger ones, or fold altogether, and in this process song catalogs are mixed around. The master recording owner can then set their own price, or deny the use of the sample altogether. As you can see, this isn't a quick or easy process. Therefore, artists often don't even clear the samples before they release it. And sometimes the artist gets away with it, either because they aren't big enough to draw a large enough audience to notice, or the sample is construed in such a way that it's practically unrecognizable. But if caught, it can suck. A lot. Kanye West is a prime example of an artist who rarely clears his samples, like the sample he used in his Yeezus track, New Slaves, where he samples the band Omega at the very end. This led to the singer of Omega suing Kanye 3 years later, saying Kanye sought out permission, but they never actually closed on a deal. He even said that Kanye randomly sent him a $10,000 check, which he didn't cash. The suit was over much more money than that, $2.5 million, but both ended up settling for an undisclosed amount a year later. Another recent example is Juice WRLD's use of Sting's Shape of My Heart in his own popular song Lucid Dreams. Because of this uncleared sample, Sting now owns 85% of all revenue made off of Lucid Dreams, which now has over 1 billion plays on Spotify. Now that we have a good idea of what sampling is and how the process works, let's get back to Frank Dukes. The Toronto producer wanted to make sampling more simple, therefore he invented Kingsway Music Library. Kingsway Music Library is a collection of compositions that Frank produces and compiles together into different volumes. To this day, there are over 40 Kingsway Music volumes. The great thing about these is how simple it is to sample from them. All a producer has to do is purchase one of the volumes that he or she wants to sample from for around $40, and plenty of producers, big and small, have been doing so.
It really came from me just being like a super hip-hop kid, sampling records, and starting to get some work and working with like a couple major label artists, and either my records getting shelved because they were samples, or just like being taxed crazy publishing, crazy fees on it. And I was obsessed with I was just like obsessed with music and collecting records, so I was always curious about how to make shit sound like the records I love. So that's how I got into making samples. They were for me, and then I started distributing them to my friends. And
some of the most popular songs contain samples from Frank's Kingsway Music Library, tracks like Real Friends by Kanye, and 0 to 100 by Drake. 0 to 100 in particular has a funny backstory, as Frank originally sent it to Boi-1da, one of Drake's frequent producers, who then played it for P. Diddy. P. Diddy ended up passing on the beat, as quoted saying, "It wasn't life-changing enough." A year later, that song was nominated for a Grammy, to which Frank responded saying, "It's my first year being nominated. It's cool. It's not really something that matters to me, but you know, it will help my rate go up." As a way of giving back to his Toronto community, Frank has brought on younger, lesser-known, local producers to contribute to the Kingsway Music Library volumes as a way to get their names out there as well as make some extra money. Personally, Frank doesn't seem too concerned with the money aspects associated with Kingsway. As he's mentioned, "I didn't create Kingsway for financial gain. It was just the road I was going down." The question is, what's next for Frank Dukes? Now living in LA, it's hard to imagine what or where his next move will be, given how accomplished he is at the young age of 36. Even he himself isn't quite sure, as when he was asked what's next in an interview, he responded, "I'm figuring it out. I'm realizing that my creativity can be applied to so much outside of just music. I just want to create things at the end of the day." Even today, he has been steadily releasing songs as a producer, but given the creator that he is, it would come to me as no surprise to see him move outside of music entirely and take on a whole new project, something that I would be personally very excited to see. What are your thoughts on sampling? Do you think it's a part of the art or just stealing another piece of work? Drop a comment below, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to Tofu Media for more videos like these. Thanks for watching.